and welcome to slide pack 7 of the financial modeling program. What we plan to do here is just go through setting up of Excel, and I'll also talk about some of the formatting features, etc. And this is when you open up Excel, you're starting from scratch and you're going to build your financial model. So with that, I'm going to move into Excel and we'll just play around live in Excel. So there we go. I have a blank Excel sheet here. Now, before we go into details, I just want you to note a couple of things. This, by the way, is version 2003, I believe. And a quick way of checking your version is if you go into Help and you say About Microsoft Excel. So there it is. It says this is Microsoft Office Excel 2003 on the very top line. I say OK, and that's that. The newer versions definitely are more user-friendly, but this one has all of the functionality that we will need to build financial models. So Excel lets you set up your screen so that you can have these icons such as the save icon or the print icon or the sum icon, or how big you want your zoom to be, or what the font is, or what the font size is, bold, italic, etc., etc. There's the dollars, there's the commas, and all this is stuff that I have customized and set it because these are things I typically use with my Excel. What you'll also see on the right side is there's this little thing that says toolbar options, and if you click on it and you go to add or remove buttons, it'll let you add or remove buttons based on the ones you use or the ones that you don't use. And it also lets you customize things if you want to. But we're not going to go into that, but I want you to know that Excel allows you to do a fair amount of customization. The other thing I'd like you to note is that there is this little box that we have spoken about before, where you can type a question. So for example, if we just go in and say NPV and press enter, Excel will try and look for answers in its own database, and it'll look for answers from Excel's online database. And here it has the results displayed, and I can go in there and I can click on NPV, and it pops out a little window that then gives me help for the NPV calculation. So like I'd said earlier, help is always on hand when you're using Excel, and when you cannot find what you're looking for in this help menu, you can always go online and type in a search item and you should get your answers from there. So now that I'm done with that, I can close out that little help window so that it gives me more of the Excel spreadsheet screen. Now, a couple of other things that I also want you to notice. At the bottom here is a tab, and many of you might have 3 tabs here, which is Excel's default. You can double click on this where it says sheet 1, and you can go in there and change this to whatever you want to change it to. So in my example, I'm just going to change it to income statement. Okay. Now, another thing that I like to do is when I start out, I typically might say specify the company name here or the project name here. So in this case, I'm just going to say Cisco Systems Financial Model. And below that, I'll just say DCF CALCULATION, DCF calculation. Now, I'd like to make this font bigger, and Excel lets me do that. So I'm going to go in there and make this a 20 size font, and I'm going to make it bold. And I'm going to make that DCF calculation maybe a 14 size. Now, this is just something that you may want to do from a usability perspective. If someone comes to your sheet, they look at this and they clearly know what this sheet is about or what this model is about. The other thing I do is I actually hold down the control key and the shift key, and I press my right arrow, and that selects all of the rows in row 2. And then I go here where I've got the borders tool, and I click on that and I say, you know what, just give me a thick bottom border. So I stick that in there, and when I take my cursor down, you can see that I've got this little line at the top that sort of forms my header. Now the other thing I do as practice is I either pick the 4th row or the 5th row or the 6th row, but I consistently pick the same row in every worksheet where I start entering my data. So let's just say I go in here and I type in revenue, and let's just say this is the income statement. Now let me just put in a number for this revenue, and we'll come back to the numbers down the road. So I've put in a number. The other thing I'd like to do is I'd like to put in a date, and I'm just going to sort of stick in a date. Now this date is in your standard MMDDYYYY format. What I can do is I can go into format. In fact, before I do that, let's just say I have a couple of places where I enter dates, and let's just say this is 3/3/2009, this is 3/3/2010, and this is 3/3/2011. So those are columns where, let's say, I'm going to be entering historical financial data. Now what I can do is I can hold down the shift key and press the right arrow and select all 3 of these cells, and then go into format cells. So what I'm going to do now is format all 3 of these cells collectively to have the same format. And you can see that Excel has enough intelligence that it recognizes this is a date that we've put in. So it opens up this date thing and says, how do you want to format your date? How do you want it to appear? So financial statements typically don't have a lot of detail where they say Wednesday, March 14th. But what's common is to use something that says 14 March 01. Another thing that's common is something that says March 01 or March 01, where March is completely spelled out. So as you can see, you have a bunch of options here in terms of how you'd want your date to appear. And what I plan to do is I'm just going to go with something that is very standard and readable. The thing that happens with models in an increasingly global world is that on the 3/3 you're safe, but for example some countries do the day before the month. So so a 3/3/2000, well, in this case, like I said, it's the same, so I should probably go in there and change that. So I'm gonna click on that and I'm gonna say OK. Now just to talk about, I'm gonna change that to a 3/1/09, and I'm gonna make this a 3/1/2010, and I'm gonna make this a 3/1/2011. Now as I type, Excel automatically changes the format to the date format I specified. Now what I was talking about here is that some countries might read 3/1/2009 as the 3rd of January 2009. So not everyone necessarily follows the US convention, and that can cause some confusion. So I prefer to spell out the date, and I'd recommend that you do that also. Now what I can also do is again go in here and say, you know what, I just want to have a line here to separate the date from the other numbers. So I've done that. Now let's just say this is an area where I hold down the shift key and I use my arrow keys while holding down the shift to highlight the area where I plan to type in my numbers for the income statement. So this is the area I've highlighted. Now let me go back into format cells, and here I want to use a number format, or I can use a currency format, and I can specify the number of decimal places, or if I want the $sign or not, and things like that. I can also talk about the alignment and the font. But what I have done in my Excel is I actually have some of these toolbars already here. So I'm just going to go in there and stick in the currency style. I want the dollar. Now as you can see, the way I have my default setup, it actually gives me a comma on every 1,000 spaces. So it's 13 comma 456 comma 732, and it also gives me 2 decimal spaces. Now when I'm talking about revenue of $13.5 million, I think the 23 cents is sort of noise, and what I can do is I can click on this, which is a decreased decimal little widget, and I press that there, and voila, my decimals go away. And my dollar sign is on the left side, and this is what it'll look like. Now, what I also see is that the dates on top kind of look funny, and the column widths are funny, so let's just fix it one at a time. Again, I'm going to just hold down my shift key and use my right arrow key while the shift is down, and then I am going to go and say format column width. And so this says, what do you want the width to be? And why don't I go in and try a width of 15, and I can then either press enter or say okay. Now it's made all of those 3 columns the same width, which is a nice thing to have. The second thing I think that looks sort of odd is that the date is really shifted to the right side, not necessarily how I want it to look. So again, I hold down the shift key and I click on the right arrow to highlight the cells that I want to change. Then I go into format and I go into cells again, and I say, this time I want to change the alignment. And here what I'm gonna do is that on the horizontal alignment, I want my dates to be centered, and then I'm gonna press on OK, and now my dates are centered. Now the other thing you might want to do is go in and select those cells and say, you know what, it'll be nice if the date is in bold also, so let me do that. Now another thing people like to do is they tend to want to give a bit of a gap between the date and the number right below it, just to not crowd things up. So you can go into insert rows, and you see that automatically Excel inserts a row in there. Now just another tip, you can go in there and go format row, and you can see I want to change the height. So right now the height is 12.75. Why don't we go in there and change the height to, let's just do 4. So you see, you've given it some height, but perhaps it's too close, so you can go back in there again and say format row height, and I'm just going to make that a 6. Let's just give it some more height. And I'm doing this just to show you how we can play around with things in Excel. So now you have the dates set up in a format you want, and you've got the numbers set up in a format that you want. Now Excel also has this thing where if your company follows a certain global style on all of their spreadsheets, and if they have a sample font and a sample font size and stuff like that, you can go into format, click on style, and this will tell you what your Excel defaults are. But if you click on modify, you can go in and you can change the number, you can change the decimal places, you can change the alignment, you can change the font. I've got Times New Roman regular 10. You can change that to whatever you want. You can have borders in your sheets, you can have patterns such as cell shading, you can have protection so that people do not mess around with the formulas that you have in that cell. So that is that, and I'm just going to cancel out of that. Now let's just say I want to, so currently this cell is cell C7. So when I place my when I'm in that cell, if you look at the top left, it says C7. Now what I can do is I can take my cursor there and essentially just click once and delete the C7 and change this to, I'm just going to say revenue underscore March 09. So now I've given my cell a name, and a lot of times naming cells helps when you're writing formulas, because people can then see that it actually refers to this cell, and they don't have to go and say what was cell C7 again. They now know that cell C7 has a name, and that name is revenue for March 2009. So that just makes the readability of your model a lot better. So that we've covered tab naming. If you want to insert another sheet, you can just go into insert and say insert a worksheet. Now, so what you see here is Excel has given you a sheet 2, which by default it places as the first sheet in the worksheet. But now I'm gonna likely have to give this a title and recreate everything, so that's not something I want. So I am going to go back to the income statement, and I'm gonna say edit, and in edit I will go and say move or copy sheet, and then I will specify that I want to create a copy of the sheet that I'm currently on, and I want to move it to the end, and I click on OK. Now what happens is it copies that sheet and gives it to me here. So I can go into the tab, double click it, and just change the tab name to, let's just say, balance sheet. And it keeps all of the title the same, it keeps the date format the same, it keeps the columns the same, which is something that saves me some work, and it also increases the consistency of my worksheet. So I can do that, and I can go into my sheet 2 and I can just say edit, delete sheet, and it takes it away. So as opposed to creating blank worksheets, once you create one worksheet, it's just easier to create copies of that worksheet, and you save a lot of time, and that is something that we would recommend. Now, another thing that I feel is very useful in Excel financial models is auditing. So for example, let me just stick in a few more numbers, just randomly stick in a couple of numbers here. So I've got a couple of numbers. Now if I go in here and if I say equals sum of this, this, and this, so I have a formula there, as you can see. Now let me just show you this. If you go into tools, and if you go into formula auditing, and if you say trace all the dependents on this cell, in this case it says there is no other cell that's dependent on this, which is exactly right. Now if you go into tools and do formula auditing and say trace precedence, what it will do is it will highlight the 3 cells that are flowing into this formula. So from an auditing perspective, this is just a good thing to know. So I would say, use the auditing feature. If you like, you can also add the auditing toolbar, and let's just show you how to do that. So if you go into view and if you go into toolbars, you can see that you can click on formula auditing, and it'll bring this floating toolbar that you can move around to wherever you want. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take it up there, and so now I have formula auditing also as part of my Excel spreadsheet. So auditing is a very useful feature in Excel financial models because it helps you trace dependence and precedence, and it's very useful if you have large worksheets or if you have multi-tabbed worksheets. So I think this really covers a lot of the basics about formatting your Excel spreadsheets, and we'll close it here. Thank you very much.